instead of the focus more so being support the neoliberalism model, there was this shift to let's support the radical model. So now that's why you have millions of people out in the streets protesting in France. So now the majority of the people are wanting to embrace radicalism, or are embracing the more what's considered radical option over the neoliberal option. And I think that is especially key if you want to have a massive class movement in this country. As long as people, the majority, still embrace the neoliberal model, we're never going to get anywhere in reference to making these demands, which means you would need at least 5% of the American population. That's all I'm asking for, to embrace that radical model to get substantial change. 5%. You don't need 80%. You don't need 90%. You just need 5% of the people in this country to want to flip and embrace that radical model. Now, what does that mean? That means that those 5% of Americans at some point will have to lose hope and faith in the electoral process. This is why I talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit. This is why I talk about how people have been given their money, given their last to these candidates and got nothing in return. This is why I continue to talk about it. Because until you get to the point where you say that is it, I do not trust the electoral process in this country, it is going to be very difficult to get some type of radical class movement in this country. Because at the end of the day, you cannot have both. And I want to be very clear when I say this. You cannot have both. Let me explain to you why. One of the reasons why the civil rights movement was so successful is because they did not have both. The people focused on the activism for the civil rights movement were not trying to run for office. The people focused on the activism for the civil rights movement were not outside saying, donate money to such and such candidate. They were focused particularly on the movement and the cause. Here is what happens when you try to do both. 9 times out of 10, the neoliberal side, what he's referring to, wins out over the radical side because that's easier to do. It's easier just to donate money. It's easier just to go to the booth and vote. It's much more difficult to do the radical process, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. That's why I tell you, you can't do both at once. So what does that mean? That means that if we got 5% of the American people to embrace the more radical side of we are going to protest such and such day after day after day after day until we get these demands met, like the people in France, that is one way to go about having a significant class movement in this country. They're not going to just give it to you. They're not just going to give you a $15 minimum wage just because they think you've been suffering long enough. If that was the case, you would have had it years ago. They're not just going to give you health care just because they're like, oh, all these people are sick and dying. Maybe we should give everybody health care now. That's not how it works. You have to demand it. And that's what people in France understand. And that's what a lot of Americans do not understand. A lot of Americans think they can just get this shit done by going to the booth and voting for someone. If that were the case, so many working class people and poor people in this country would not be without. It is not the case. And that is why you don't have the things that you should have. Necessary benefits just for as being a citizen in this fucking country. That's why. You tell yourself that you deserve it. They don't think that you do.